Welcome, everybody. My name is Melanie Brooks, and I am the audience coordinator at the BDN. Tonight, we're talking about the 2020 census with Maine Secretary of State Matt Dunlap, State Economist Amanda Rector, and Jeff Behler, Director of the New York Regional Office for the U.S. Census Bureau. I want to begin by thanking our partners for tonight's event, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare and AARP. These businesses and organizations, along with our BDN subscribers, mean that we can invite these esteemed guests to our events and have discussions that really matter to you. So thank you very much, all of you, for your support. You may have noticed that you're muted. I ask that you keep yourself in this mode during our presentation, and if you have questions throughout this event, please send them in using the chat function, and I'll get to them after I do a little Q&A with our special guests. Don't be shy. This is your chance to talk to census experts, and you might not get this chance again. So I am very pleased to have three wonderful guests with us tonight, and I'm just going to take a moment to introduce them. Secretary of State Matthew Dunlap of Old Town is Maine's 49th Secretary of State. He is now serving his fourth consecutive and seventh overall term in office. He previously served 3 terms as Maine's 47th Secretary of State and is the first person to serve non-consecutive terms as Secretary of State since 1880. Amanda Rector is a state economist for Maine. In this capacity, she conducts ongoing analysis of Maine's economic and demographic conditions to help inform policy decisions. Amanda is a member of the State of Maine's Revenue Forecasting Committee, and she serves as the governor's liaison to the U.S. Census Bureau. She started working for the state in 2004 and has been the state economist since 2011. Jeff Behler is the director for the Census Bureau's New York Regional Office, and he's joining us today from Connecticut. He began his Census Bureau career in the Detroit Regional Office in 1997. He was responsible for the 2010 census in the Dallas region before becoming the director of the Detroit Regional Office. And he moved to his current position in New York in 2013. So thank you all for being here. I am going to kick off this event by asking Maine Secretary of State Matt Dunlap a few questions. So let's get started. Do you have an example of how past census data has informed public policy?
Oh, absolutely. You know, you certainly look at, the census data that was accumulated from the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s during the baby boom years. That's how Congress was appropriating money to build all these new schools, to allocate money under the GI Bill and send people off to college. These are programs that are relatively new. You go back before the Depression, when we didn't have things like the Federal Depositors Insurance Corporation that protected our bank deposits, things were much, much different. And as we began building programs to protect people and to protect their future, things like Medicaid, Medicare, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, knowing where things were and what needed to be worked on around population centers and how development would impact population centers. This is all, just vast volumes of aggregated data that really begins and ends with where people live and where people are. That has impacted the development of our education system, our land grant college systems and how they've thrived and had to respond to changing demographic trends. Baby boom's over, right? I was born in the last year of the baby boom, and you see how well that holds. So, I think that as we go forward with planning, certainly the past examples of being able to track not only population trends, but also economic trends, how inflation and the entire nature of our monetary policy, which is a different story altogether, helps inform our economy in the backdrop of our population growth and trends.
So if I understand correctly, you chaired the Maine Complete Count Committee to promote the U.S. Census. So I'm wondering, what are some of the ways that Maine promoted the census this year?
Well, of course, a lot of it was cut off at the knees by the pandemic. Back in March, as we began this process, the commissioner of the Department of Administration and Finance and I helped kick off the census period by doing our census input live at a press event at the state library. We didn't cheat. I had never seen the website before. and I was able to fill out my census form in about 2 or 3 minutes. It was really, really pretty simple. Now, my daughter is at the University of Maine, and she lives on campus. So she had to do her own census input. And I called her up and said, don't forget to do your census. And she also, having never seen it before, was able to complete it in just a few minutes. So it's a really simple process. So we did some promotion along that. But then when the pandemic hit, a lot of this was shut down. State government took on a different look and feel, as certainly our offices at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. We closed those for 2.5 months, and that was true of a lot of offices, and it kind of slowed things down a little bit. And it wasn't until July that we were able to pick up the slack and get the door-to-door canvassers out to actually do the physical count of people who did not respond in those our initial pleadings to use the online service. And at one juncture, we were really lagging far behind. I think we're in the bottom 6 of the country for input into the census. That's now completely turned around, and I think we're very pleased to report that as of today, we are number 5 in the country for the best reply rate. So we're doing much, much better.
That is a great turnaround. So I know that the deadline is coming up. So is there still time for people to respond to the census, and how would you suggest the easiest, quickest way for someone to do that would be?
I think the easiest way is to get online and get on to 2020census.gov and fill out the very simple form. People had emails sent to them or mail that had like a code they could use. You don't need the code. You can just go in and do it. So it's very, very simple. And that's the easiest way to do it. If people I know that people sometimes are a little bit afraid to do things online, and we've had a few requests for us to send paper forms to people, which we've fulfilled. And then of course you have the door-to-door canvassers that go into those areas where people don't have that kind of internet connectivity. And so if you haven't seen anything in the mail and you don't have access to the internet easily, sometimes people are not in an area that has good internet access. Most towns who have libraries with good internet access. And that's sometimes the best resource for people to use, because they can also ask their librarian. Librarians know a lot more sometimes than we make use of. And as a matter of fact, since we happen to mention the library, let's expand the conversation. So tomorrow, from 1 to 4 in the afternoon, they'll have mobile questionnaire assistance. It's a mobile questionnaire assistance event at the Bangor Public Library, which is one of my favorite libraries. Tomorrow afternoon, 1 to 4, we'll have some census workers there. And they're going to be working outdoors, they'll be on site to maintain social distancing. They'll be outside, but they'll be there to answer people's questions and to help them complete their 2020 census form right there on the spot. So that's tomorrow, 1 to 4 at the Bangor Public Library, if you haven't already done it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Matt. I have some questions for Amanda next. Amanda, as the state economist, I can imagine that you use census data a great deal. Can you share some examples of how this data is important to your work?
Absolutely. I think probably if we had no census data, I probably would not have a job. I don't think a day goes by that I don't look at census data in one form or another. Certainly my job would be much, much harder without census data. In addition to the population data, which is sort of the underpinning of all of the demographic data that we look at, and I use in my population projections when I'm updating sort of a forward-looking demographic data. We get a ton of really good detailed data from the American Community Survey that took over the place of the long form of the decennial census after the 2000 census. And so that gives us lots of data on housing and family relationships and income and educational attainment and just about anything else you could possibly think of. I was very jealous of my father-in-law, who a couple of years ago was selected in their sample to complete the American Community Survey. I got very excited when he was like, I got this thing from the census and I don't know what it was. And I'm like, oh, it's the American, anyway, sidetrack. I will say that one of the other things that has been really interesting and exciting and helpful for me recently is Census has been doing some weekly pulse surveys, both of households and of small businesses, that have been getting weekly information to those of us who were really desperate for updates on what was happening during COVID times. And so they've been releasing those. There was a phase 1 that completed for both of those, and they've started phase 2 for both of those as well. But, you know, normally we think of the census as this large, unwieldy beast that takes forever to get any data out, but they've been turning this around very, very quickly, and we've found a lot of useful information in those figures as well. So, and of course, you know, Secretary Dunlap mentioned this a little bit earlier too, but certainly census data is the basis of distribution of federal funding for very, very large sums of money, not just in normal times, but also, you know, you think about the CARES Act and the coronavirus relief funds, those were distributed on the basis of the population of your state. And so it really, it has an impact all up and down the board.
Thank you for that. I wanted to mention that Maine is one of the top states in having a high percentage of households already counted in the census. I think this afternoon, the count was at like 97.3%. But I did notice in some data that we have a lower self-response rate. Can you explain what a self-response rate is and why that might be?
Yeah, so there are a couple different reasons for that. One of the biggest reasons is the rural nature of our state. So essentially when the census first kicked off, people were able to self-respond. So you either got something in the mail that said, hey, go fill out your census, here's your ID number, and you'd go online and fill it in, or you could call up and answer over the phone, or get a paper form and send it in. And then after a certain period of time, the census started sending people out into the field to do non-response follow-up, which, just as it sounds, is following up with households that have not responded. So those folks then would sort of capture any of the households that didn't respond. So Maine, being a very rural state, a lot of our households were in a phase of the census called update leave, where instead of getting something sent to your house, somebody would come to your house, update your address in the Census Bureau's address files, and then leave the documents there at your house for you to then go online. They just started doing that, and then everything got shut down because of COVID, and so they had to pull all of the field workers in while they tried to figure out how to make sure that they could conduct this operation safely for everyone. So that really set us behind in terms of self-response, because there may have been a lot of households that didn't know that the census was even going on because they hadn't received anything about it. And we also have a lot of post office box only households, and those also maybe wouldn't have ever seen anything. So a lot of folks maybe didn't know to go online and do the self-response. So our initial numbers in terms of self-response were very low for those reasons, and probably a few others, including our lack of internet access in some parts of the state. So the fact that we've managed to catch up and now be one of the top responding states when you wrap up all of the field operations along with the self-response is really tremendous. It's a real relief when we first started to see the self-response numbers and worry that we might have a lot of households missed. To see that we're at a much, much higher response rate now is reassuring.
So I saw a statistic that more than 40% of households responded through the online portal, which this is the first time that the census was provided that way. Is this like the wave of the future? Is this how people are going to be doing the census from here on out?
And until the next best new thing comes out, which I'm not sure what that will be, but at least at this point in time, yes, the census joined the 21st century this go round and offered an internet self-response option, which I think has really been helpful, particularly during the period when people weren't able to go out, the field workers weren't able to go out. People could still go online and respond. You didn't have to worry about trying to track down a paper form or wait for somebody to come to your door to fill it out, then and you didn't have to worry about, particularly, you know, in the era of social distancing, you didn't have to worry about having additional contact. You could just go online, fill it out, and it would be done. Now, clearly, the flip side of that is that we have a lot of parts of the state that don't have great internet access, and so that was a challenge. If you look at sort of the sub-state breakdown, those parts of the state that have better internet access, places like Cumberland County, Androscoggin County, Saginaw County, you know, sort of the southern major metro areas of the state, they tended to have higher self-response rates overall and higher internet self-response rates. Makes sense, where people have access. There are fewer households within those counties that are rural and part of the other phases of the census that didn't receive the mailings. So I do think that it was incredibly helpful given the certain circumstances. If we hadn't been doing the internet response, I think we would have been in much worse shape than we are now.
I can imagine. Thank you so much, Amanda. Next, I have some questions for Jeff before I come back to the group. So, Jeff, you are at the regional office. So I'm wondering if you can provide some information on how COVID-19 altered the operational plan for the 2020 census and what that was like for you.
Yeah, it was rather dramatic. I mean, we should have been done with the census at the end of July. That was the original schedule. You know, we started on time, mid-March, but all counting activities should have ended at the end of July. Amanda mentioned about how we do an operation called Update Leave, where we actually hand deliver the questionnaire packets in more rural areas, PO box only areas, to ensure, you know, every household gets the opportunity to self-respond. We started that operation on March 15th. We stopped that operation 2 days later. And for a state like Maine, a very large percentage of the state receives their invitation that way. So when we were looking at the beginning at self-response rates out of the gate, people would, you know, look at Maine and say, what's going on there? You know what? Well, it's no one's fault, because, you know, COVID wouldn't allow us to safely hand deliver those packages. The other big thing that this really changed from an operational perspective is the time in which we knock on doors. We were scheduled to start knocking on doors of every household that had yet to respond beginning May 13th. And it just wouldn't have been safe to do that. Not safe for the public and not safe for our employees. So that date was pushed to August 9th was the national start date. We got to start a little bit earlier in Maine because Maine was operationally ready. We had a great office staff. We had a great field staff, a whole bunch of people who applied for these jobs who still wanted to go out there and support their communities while working for the census. And we ended up getting off to a great start with non-response follow-up, and it shows in the rates right now. I mean, it's a testament to the work of our partners, because another critical kind of you know, and the secretary talked about it earlier, there were some really cool plans in place for March and April and May to really engage communities who maybe don't trust the government. Maybe, you know, there's just a lack of education on what the census is and what it brings to the community. And the best way to motivate them is in person, you know, whether it's at a church service or at the public library or at that community-based organization, listening to someone that they trust, talk about what the census is all about, why it's so important, and then give them the opportunity right then and there to fill it out, whether it's on an iPad or a laptop. And unfortunately, those things couldn't happen. And rather than giving up, our partners did some really cool things, just like what we're doing right now, connecting virtually to get the message out there, you know, that the census is safe, how easy it is to fill it out in 2020, and what's at stake for our communities for the next 10 years.
So I'm hoping that you can tell us what states are in the New York region and how Maine's response compares with theirs, and maybe if we have done something differently or other states are trying something differently as well to get their responses in.
Yeah, so many, it's hard for us. I don't like comparing states to states only because they're so unique. And for a state like Maine, Vermont is similar to Maine as far as the amount of workload that they had in this update leave operation where we hand delivered. So if you would have looked at all our states, and we cover all, of course, all of Maine, we cover all of New York, New Jersey, all the New England states, and Puerto Rico. Yes, I said Puerto Rico, that's part of our territory too. Don't ask me why, I don't know, but it is. So we saw those other states get out to a much faster start. They had more households that were receiving it via the mail system. So it totally makes sense. But now, the tables have kind of turned because we were able to get out there and start non-response follow-up. We have this operation that we conduct in remote Alaska and remote Maine. It's called Update Enumerate. We actually go out there and these are the camps. These are going down the logging trails. We have to visit every place a person lives or could live. And that includes camps. Tent communities or just cabins in the woods. And, Maine has just done a great job of persevering at times when, they were at the bottom of the list. They didn't give up and they weren't concerned because they knew at the end of the day, Mainers were going to fill out their census.
So I've heard some stories about enumerators trying to get to these very rural areas. Do you have any stories or anything that you can share about ways that the enumerators have reached the most rural parts of Maine?
Yeah, we have receipts for snowshoe rentals. We have, ATV receipts. We've rented boats, planes. It's really planes, trains, automobiles, I guess is what you could say. One really cool story is someone posted on social media about a census worker who kayaked out to their island to ensure that they got their update leave package, that they got their invitation in the mail. We also have people, when they're out there knocking on doors, they're taking kayaks to some of these locations that maybe haven't filled out the form. And during that update leave operation, one of the, again, it's a testament to the passion people have to ensure their communities are counted. We had two gentlemen working Update Enumerate, and they had to go on one of these logging trails, and they left early in the morning. They took two cars, and one car had the right set of tires on it. Well, the first car blew a tire, so that car had to pull off to the side of the road, and they drove in the truck the rest of the way, or part of the way, and they blew another tire. And this was about 1 PM, and they had to walk a couple miles until they got to a logging truck that was probably about 2 AM. They slept in a logging truck for a couple hours because there was no one around until one of the logging workers came in about 5, woke him up, scared him a little bit about getting out of his truck, but then the gentleman gave them a ride back to the ranger station. So, I mean, it's just, it's a testament to again, this isn't just a job for so many people. They really do want to make sure that their state, that their local community gets its fair share of federal funding and its fair share of representation. And to do that, you have to get counted in the 2020 census.
I had heard the kayaking one, but man, snowshoes, that's dedication right there. You had mentioned people that might live in tents. I'm wondering, how do you count people who are experiencing homelessness?
Yeah, our job is to count everyone only once and in the right place. And that includes those that are experiencing homelessness. And next week is a big week for us. It's our service-based enumeration. This is where we will visit between the 22nd and 24th of September. We're going to visit every mobile food van, every soup kitchen, every homeless shelter. We've already been in contact with the administrators of those sites, asking them, first off, would they prefer to give us an administrative list of the people that they serve, because we need to make sure those persons get counted. And if not, we send a team of census takers there to basically interview each person if they're willing to. If not, we'll do a simple head count. So that's a 3-day period that we'll be conducting those operations next week. And then there's the group of people who are experiencing homelessness who aren't staying in a shelter. Maybe they're staying in a tent encampment in the woods, or sleeping below an overpass or behind a church. Becky Buber, who's on this call, who's an amazing partnership specialist in the state of Maine, her and her colleagues are working with our partners who work with those community leaders who, support.
I stopped it. I mean,
they're working with those people who are experiencing homelessness or providing services to those who are experiencing homelessness. And we've created this list over the last 1.5 to 2 years. And on the early morning, about 1 o'clock in the morning on September 24th, we are going to go out there in full force and visit every one of those locations. We're not going to wake anyone up. We're just going to do a simple head count, because those people who are experiencing homelessness, who aren't staying in a shelter, have to be included in the census.
That sounds like a huge undertaking.
Yeah, it is. It's a massive undertaking, but we get so many great volunteers and so many, those who really work with individuals who are experiencing homelessness, providing information, input, guidelines, things we need to be aware of, to make sure that we're all safe in doing this. And certainly we don't want to, startle anyone who may be sleeping.
Sure. Matt had mentioned the mobile questionnaire assistance event that's going to be held at the Bangor Public Library tomorrow. I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about these events, how they came about, and how you've been using them in Maine and really across the nation.
Yeah, this is probably one of the best things that the Bureau did outside of, catching up to the 21st century with bringing internet and other computer technology capabilities to the census. This was really, and this was something that kind of came along late in the game. We had just kind of put this idea together late in 2019 before the census. And the idea was we had all these recruiting assistants, over 700 nationwide, that used iPads to help people apply for census jobs. And the recruiting assistants jobs were about to end. They were going to end in February of 2020. And we came up with the idea, let's use these tablets, these iPads, to allow people to self-respond to the census. So maybe they don't have internet connectivity at home, or maybe they don't want to go to the public library, but maybe they're at, right now we're at food distribution sites. We're going to libraries. We're going to COVID testing sites, places where there are people who are gathering, to give them the opportunity to fill out the census using our device, using our, internet connectivity. They also have the support there from census takers, from our census response representatives, from Becky and the other partnership specialists who are at these events. We're all sworn census employees, meaning we cannot share any of the information that we may be entering on behalf of an individual or helping them fill it out. Because if we do share information, we get thrown in jail for 5 years. We get fined up to $250,000. And we know the public's trust is the foundation of getting a complete and accurate census, and we take that seriously.
I just noticed a question from Kevin on here about how you were talking about doing a head count for homeless people. So is that assuming that those people that you have head counted at that one time haven't been counted or won't be counted someplace else?
No, it doesn't assume that. Unfortunately, we don't. We do on duplication efforts at the end of the census. But with the homeless community, it's not as easy, because we certainly understand, even if we're at a homeless shelter or a mobile food van or soup kitchen, sometimes people don't want to talk to us. And we're just, writing down male, approximate age type information. That's all we get. And then, what that person could be, if they are experiencing homelessness, could be staying in one of those tent communities or beneath the overpass. And so there will be duplication when we do count the homeless.
I noticed a question here from Jessica, who is worried about an undercount. She shared some information in the chat about an article from Government Executive. And there are hundreds of thousands of enumerators to complete the census work. And she's wondering about not having enough of them to adequately do the job this year. Is that true? And I guess she was, let me see. Sorry, it's a really long question. Maybe you can talk, any of you can talk a little bit about the volunteers, enumerators, their jobs, and if you've had enough of them this year to complete the task.
Yeah, in the New York region, and again, all of the Maine, the New England states, New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, we've hired over 48,000 census takers for our region alone. In Maine, we have upwards of probably 1,500 to 2,000 at peak operations. And what's really cool now is there's parts of the nation who have struggled. We've been blessed with COVID-19 not hitting, it hit our areas very early in the pandemic. And while it's still, spurting up here and there, in the South, it's really affected them, more recently. We have wildfires and things out on the West Coast. So we're actually, there's census takers in Maine who said, you know what, we understand there's other parts of the country need help. Our work in our area has dwindled to the point where we only need a handful of people to finish up the remaining workload. So they're jumping on a plane, they're going down to Georgia, they're going to Louisiana, they're going out to Navajo Nation, areas of where we really do need census takers. We have been blessed. There's no area within our New York region where we need additional help. We're certainly in areas where we're not done yet, and maybe we could use additional resources to get done a little sooner if people are willing to work because they don't have any more work left in their current area because they completed it and they want to work some more. We're going to send them over there to give them some work because they've been working hard and they've dedicated the last 6-7 weeks to ensure their communities get counted.
So here's a question. Is it possible to be visited by a census worker, even if you've already filled out the census? Like maybe someone's come to your door, but you filled it out online?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know that's a frustration for so many people. That's probably the biggest concern that we hear from the public when they're calling us with concerns that they have. Non-response follow-up, it's more than just knocking on the doors of the addresses that have yet to respond. We do a quality control check for people who self-respond, just to go out there and double check to make sure there's no fraud going on, where people are just entering in a random address and putting in the information. So that's a piece of this. That could be a reason why you get a visit. If you went online and filled it out or called it in over the phone and you didn't use your census ID, and the address that you entered doesn't match exactly to the address we have on our master address file, we're going to send someone out just to check. They're not going to ask all the questions again, but they are going to verify the address. We don't want to delete any address or flag an address for deletion unless we're positive that it's a duplicate of another address or it's an address that no longer exists. We also have re-interview that we do out there. Again, just another quality check. So we ask, please, you're more than welcome to call us. Everything that we've been researching so far, and that number's, let me give that number to you, 212-882-7100. That's our regional census center hotline. We have staff who, if they don't answer, leave your name and phone number, leave your message. We will call you back to ensure that you get your concern addressed. But we can research the issue. We can let you know that, yes, indeed, we did receive your online or your over the phone response. And it's just a part of some quality control work that we're doing.
Just to make sure I have that number right, 212-882-7100.
That's correct.
Awesome. I put it in the chat for anybody if they want to call. So I'd love to hear from all of you. These census only happen every 10 years. So what lessons are you taking from the crazy 2020 census that you will keep in the back of your mind when people start planning the 2030 census?
I think from my perspective, working with the Maine Complete Count Committee, I thought it was incredibly helpful for the state agencies to all be thinking ahead of time of how they can use their existing networks to reach out and get in touch with as many people as possible. They had so many great ideas that didn't get to be used because of the situation we all ended up in. But I think that it was really helpful to think about that challenge going forward, and the fact that, hopefully we won't have to suddenly switch gears in the middle of the next census, but being prepared to face that kind of a challenge and having multiple avenues. One of the things I was going to do is I give a lot of presentations, and I wanted to make sure that anytime I gave a presentation during this window, I was telling people to go and complete their census. I did a lot fewer presentations than I normally do, but I did still have a slide in there. In fact, I just gave a presentation earlier today, and I'm like, if you haven't done your census yet, there is still time. So, I think trying to be creative about all the different possible avenues that we can try to reach out to people. So if things aren't exactly how we were hoping and expecting they would go, we aren't caught completely off guard.
Matt, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, we had some great planning sessions before everything kind of ground to a halt, and it's going to be really interesting to see over the next 10 years how technology more informs this process, especially as state agencies have become much more collaborative than they were just 10 years ago, where you have agencies working more closely together, communications people working across department lines to get information out to various demographic sections around the census and their participation in it. So you're talking about folks within the Department of Education working with our folks, because we do an awful lot of work with young people and school children. We have a very robust youth program, youth education and engagement program that helped leverage what the Department of Education was doing. And of course, like Amanda said, everything kind of came to a halt there in March, but I think looking forward to 2030, those folks will have so many more and better tools to communicate that, when we talk about the census and having the enumerators going out very much the way they did in 1790, they would go out on horseback and just go around and try to figure out how many people were in every village. We're still doing that. I think that's going to be probably a diminishing resource over time as we get more and better internet connection. And this is information that we'll be able to upload almost in real time within the next 10 to 20 years. And the census will be probably have a much different look to it than it does today. And part of that, I think, is informed by how we've responded with government services in this pandemic, and trying to innovate and use more online services. Whereas as we came into the census discussion, the online response was going to be our first reach to people, but we really anticipated it a lot more by mail and a lot more in person. And what we've seen is that we've had to really rely much more so on the online responses, and the circle being drawn more tightly around the enumerators, who are actually going out and saying, hey, don't forget your census. And people say, oh yes, we're over here. So I think we'll probably be using the in-person enumerators for quite a while, especially the stories that Jeff was telling. My father-in-law was a supervisor in the census, in the 2010 census. And he told some really, really wonderful stories about, trying to reach people who really didn't want to be touched. They really did not want to be, they didn't want to have any interaction with any government agency. And yet, as he would tell these stories, as it was just as simple as telling me how many people live in the house. And he said, that's it? He's like, yeah, that's it. That's all we really need to know. And being able to have those interactions with his neighbors in ways he had never anticipated. I think, that will probably always be a piece of it, but I think we are going to lean much more heavily on technology going into the future.
And I'll just mention, I think technology was a win in 2020 from, as long as it's not the only option, I think adding options was definite plus, because there are some people who like the feel of that paper questionnaire, and that's the way they've done it for the past 5-6 censuses, and that's the way they want to do it in 2020. So I thought it was good that we added. I think our partnership program, it has grown every decade. We had a first partnership program in Census 2000, and I thought this was by far and away the best program that we had. I thought our advertising campaign was a little bit better than what it was in the past. I thought some of the tools we put together were definitely better. And one of the things we have to incorporate is, again, whether it's the same or something similar, is this mobile questionnaire assistance, taking the devices, the resources to the communities that need that, giving them the opportunity to fill it out right then and there using, our devices, our internet connectivity. I think that's going to be extremely important for the future.
If someone wants to have the longer form to fill out, how do they receive one?
So the American community, well, I know Amanda's a big fan of that. Amanda, please go. I know.
So the long form census does not actually exist anymore, but they converted that to the American Community Survey, with the idea being that all of that really good, rich, detailed data is much more valuable if we get it every year instead of once every 10 years. So the American Community Survey is an ongoing survey, sample-based, that produces data at all different levels, and unfortunately you can't say, hey, me, I want to do it, because that would totally be me. But because it is a sample base, they have to make sure that the samples match up to give you the data that you need that's representative of the total population. So it's very carefully constructed to make sure that you do in fact have the ability to then translate those sample data into something that represents the larger geographic areas and populations. But it's nice to have annual updates. The next annual update is eagerly anticipated in the next couple of days here. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing those numbers and updating all of my charts that I use using those numbers.
I can tell you love charts and data.
I do. I mean, you know, census nerd,
Hey,
really.
it's good. We did have a question from another audience member about any books about the US Census that you would recommend. Either historical books or anything that you can think of off the top of your head.
So I'm not aware of any books, but I will tell you, if you go to census.gov, and you can just in the search bar, just type in census history, and it's really cool because you can see the content ever since 1790, what questions they asked on the census. You can see things like who was the director or who was the president. You can see that it was conducted, you know, by the U.S. Marshals in 1790. It's really great. When they started introducing, I think it was 1970, either 70 or 80, they introduced the Hispanic origin question, but it was only to 5% of the addresses across the country, and then it was introduced fully to all 100% the following decade. So it's a good tool, a good web page to check out at census.gov.
You know, and I think you guys could get together and write a book on the interesting stories of ways enumerators have reached rural Mainers. There you go. There's your book idea. Make millions. I'd read it. I think it's fascinating. So outside of this global pandemic we're dealing with, I'm wondering if there was anything surprising during the census period to you, other than, you know, we're in a global pandemic, but has there anything that's been surprising or different this year that's notable?
I'll say this. I'll say that from a census perspective, the self-response rates are amazing. I mean, you look at Maine, they bypassed, or they blew by, or they went by their I think 57.4% was the final self-response rate in 2010. That would have been the percentage of the households that filled it out on paper and mailed it back in. In 2020, it's currently at 57.7%. To bypass your self-response rate during a pandemic, to me is amazing. And again, it's a testament to the hard work of the secretary, to Amanda, to the Complete Count Committee, to all of our partners throughout the state who have worked tirelessly to take the census on into addition of everything else that they focus on. It's BDN. It's our partners who are sharing, you know, the importance of the census, how easy and how safe it is. That to me is something that I'm just so thankful and proud of our partners and the amazing work that they've done. That is a true testament to their perseverance and their, you know, just not giving up when everyone would have understand if they would have hit the pause button. They didn't, and that's pretty cool.
I would agree with that. And you know, going back to when all this began to really blow open in February, you know, as we started to become more aware of what was happening in Asia, you know, I've been over there, and it's amazing to me how many medium-sized cities China has that you've never heard of, with populations of about 15 million people, but that's Wuhan. And as it began to drift to the top of every news hour, what was happening there, I don't think a lot of us were processing what that was going to mean for the rest of us. So in terms of this census, Becky Buber came to see me 2 or 3 years ago as the census began planning for this process, looking for state partners to be involved. And eventually the governor asked me to chair the complete count committee, and we kind of took it under our arms. So we began to run with it with a plan in mind. And we've talked about that plan and how we were going to do all these events. I think, it shouldn't be surprising, but in a way it's a credit to the people of the state of Maine for adapting the way they have in the midst of this pandemic. And, as we began the census and it kind of like bogged down as, schools closed and restaurants closed, you bear in mind that back in April, turnpike traffic went down 65%. Travel out of the Portland Jetport went down 97%. All of our car dealerships were closed. All of our restaurants were closed. And people were really trying to figure out how they were going to get through this. And in that context, filling out a government form is about the last thing on their mind. And yet, nonetheless, as we've continued to talk about it, and the census folks have continued to adapt and reassess where they are and where they need to be, and working with outlets like the Bangor Daily News, who has carried this as a feature regularly throughout the census period. It's gotten the attention of the public, and when they understand that this is important, you can bet they pick it up and they do it. People are very civically engaged in Maine, and we don't see it like this anywhere else in the country. Maine is always one of the top states for voter participation. We typically compete with states like Minnesota and Oregon. Oregon mails ballots to every single voter, and we sometimes exceed them in voter turnout. And that tells you an awful lot about how engaged the people of Maine are in their communities. I've been able to moderate a few town meetings over the years, and it's amazing how committed Mainers are to the future of their neighbors. And I think that translates into adapting in this time of the pandemic and doing exactly what Jeff said and turning to these resources to make sure that they are counted and that they are participating in the planning for their future. It's something that we don't talk about enough. Certainly the census people have absolutely been tremendous. Amanda Rector and her folks have been just tireless. Every time we've asked them a question, they've gotten us an answer before we even went on to the next thing we were working on. And all the other agencies, but the real credit, I believe, goes to the individual citizen who recognizes this as important and has now taken us beyond a response rate that we saw just 10 years ago when we didn't have to deal with the additional sea anchor of having a pandemic hanging around our neck.
We have just a couple minutes left, and I wanted to invite anyone in the audience that had a last question or something that they'd like to share to unmute themselves. If you do, feel free. I'll give it a second. Oh, a quiet bunch. Hopefully we've answered a lot of your questions. Thank you so much for sending all those wonderful questions in to us. And thank you, Jeff, Amanda, and Matt for spending an hour with us tonight. Thank you to Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare and AARP for helping to make these events possible. And if you're in the Bangor area tomorrow and you have not filled out your census, please feel free to stop by the Bangor Public Library between 1 and 4, and someone will be there to help you do it safely, and you can get counted. So I will send a follow-up email tomorrow with some of the links and telephone numbers that we talked about in here for you to share with your friends and family who may not have filled out the census. But until then, thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a great night.